Hi, my name's Rich Harrington.
And I'm Robbie Carmen.
And welcome to this edition of Creative Cow's DSLR podcast. Now, today we're going to tackle one of those things that keeps coming up. I wouldn't call it an argument.
You mean the never-ending debate?
The never-ending debate of zooms versus primes.
Yes. And which one's better to use, when, and what are the advantages and disadvantages, for sure.
And I think that the underlying principle, or the answer that I always try to come to in the middle is, it depends.
It really does. I mean, I think the thing that you'll find, if you're doing a lot of research online, there's people who, more so on the prime side of things, will steadfastly be like primes, 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 primes. And I generally fall into that camp, but given the situation and what you need to do and the budget that you have, zooms are often a good choice as well.
Well, I mean, I think it sort of depends upon the production style that you're under, right? Like, I could be out with this camera and I could actually attach an 18 to 300 millimeter zoom. Nikon just released one.
Yep.
It's not going to have as low of an f-stop as you would with a prime lens,
right,
or even a zoom that didn't have as wide of a range. But for running around town, shooting under good lighting conditions, that sort of flexibility is really nice, as opposed to, just a second as I change lenses.
Absolutely. I was just recently on a trip in Amsterdam, and I was carrying about a backpack, of 10 lenses. And
you are going to show this picture of me.
Yeah, sure, yeah. And having to stop every 10 minutes to be like, oops, let me change my prime, because I didn't think ahead, of course, and I didn't bring one or two zooms that could cover the entire focal range or were a good balance. So I think that's the first thing, is that when you're making the decision between a prime and a zoom, it really depends on what you're shooting.
Do you want to carry 5 or 6 lenses or 1?
Right. If you're a nature photographer and you're hiking with your tent on your back and all that kind of stuff, you probably don't want to carry 10 additional lenses. You'd like to maybe have 1 or 2 of them and a nice all-purpose kind of zoom.
But on the other hand, when doing spot type work, music video work, theatrical feature type thing, where it really is you're trying to go for that look of film, if you really want to harness the large sensor size and really get that depth of field look that we love, then prime lenses make that easier.
Well, there's a couple things about primes that make that happen. First, there's less glass involved in a prime lens than a zoom lens, right? So typically, that's why people say that a well-built prime is going to be a little sharper than even a well-built zoom. And I think there's some debate there.
Yeah, I mean, I could look right through that and see all the way through. It's basically like a piece of glass.
Right, and so the more glass you have, obviously, the more chances there are for artifacting, chromatic differences, all that kind of stuff. So generally speaking, a prime is going to be a little sharper. The other thing about primes is that typically they're going to allow you to have a larger maximum aperture. You're not going to find a 7200 zoom lens that has an aperture of 1.2.
Right.
So if you're all about bokeh porn, sorry to keep using that phrase, but if you're all about really good depth, shallow depth of field, it's going to be harder to create that depth of field using a zoom because of the higher aperture values that the zooms typically use.
Right. You're typically finding zooms being around an f4, while all the primes I have here are ranging from 1.4 to 2.8. Yeah, and that's a big difference.
Yeah, and typically the best the best zoom that you're going to find is typically about 2.8. There are some older models that went a little lower than that, but typically even the best zooms are about 2.8. So if depth of field is your primary thing, going after a prime is a good choice.
And one of the things that I say to a lot of folks as they're building their kit is consider investing in a few primes for interviews, where that depth of field, that shallow depth of field is really nice. Let the background fall off, clearly focus on the subject. But when you're running around getting B-roll and other shots, a zoom might be more flexible. Now, when you're shopping for those primes, one of the cool things is that, here's an example. This is an old prime lens, and it actually has the f-stop controls right on it with a physical ring I could turn.
Oh yeah, I mean that's one of the great things. I mean, there's a saying that good glass is for life. And if you've found a lens that you just love the look of it, yeah, I mean that's a fantastic thing to do. And the other thing to note about this is that
used lens, $80.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say it was price. You can find some really kind of cool looking glass for pretty cheap. Now on the flip side of that coin, typically, really good cinema-style glass, is going to be a prime like Cooke primes come to mind, Zeiss primes, and others. They can be pretty pricey.
Yeah, and those have markings like markings on them for distance and really big throws, and they're designed for cinema-style shooting. But these older prime lenses, one of the things to point out, people have a hard time finding old Canon primes because Canon changed their system.
They did.
But this is a photodiox ring, so I could actually just take this and put the ring onto this particular lens, and now it's got a Canon mount.
Absolutely. And there's adapters of all sorts. You know, now you're starting to see people modifying Canon cameras for PL mounts, right?
So you can actually use real cinema lenses.
You use real cinema lenses. So the adapters are, you know, a way to sort of get more bang out of your buck, if you will, for investment in lenses that you made over the years.
And before you buy lenses, there's a whole thriving market of lens rental companies where you could rent lenses for a week to try them out.
Absolutely. I recently was on a trip with my family, and I wanted a really super big telephoto. You know, it was like, I don't know, an $8,000 lens that I just didn't have the cash to go, oh, sure, I just need it. So I rented it for a week, used it, took great pictures, took great video with it, yeah, it was definitely a good choice.
Cool. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode, sort of understand the difference between zooms and primes. My name's Rich Harrington.
And I'm Robbie Carmen.
And head on over to CreativeCow.net where you can check out their very active DSLR forum, as well as the magazine and great tutorials. Thanks again.